My name is Michael Yeager, and I was a gunner's mate second class. Uh, I joined the Navy in January 1967, and I joined at the Reserve Center in Dayton, Ohio. And then in the summertime, I went to boot camp. My basic training was I had 2 weeks of boot camp at Great Lakes. Uh, but I was going to the Reserve Center for probably almost 6 months before I went to the boot camp. So I had quite a bit of experience before I went to boot camp and knew all the things that was going to happen up there. Yeah. And what was funny when I was there, boot camp turned out to be a dangerous thing to be at because one of the recruits got killed. And we marched with old Springfield rifles, and we were going to classes on these in these buildings that were 2 story, and the people that went to the second story had to stack their rifles along the railing at the outside of the building or outside of the walkway around the building. And I don't know whether somebody was goofing around or something, but somebody dropped a rifle off from the second floor down below and hit one of the recruits in the head and killed him. We also got yelled at to get up. And then everybody got dressed and we formed, got in formation and we marched to breakfast. We had our breakfast and then the drill instructor was with us at all times. And then we would go out and practice marching. And then we spent a lot of time in um, rooms watching movies about how to treat wounds, how to handle all your weapons, what to do with a, a nuclear catastrophe, uh, or like a nuclear battle of some kind. And that was about most of what we did was do the movie things. And what our drill instructor, he was scared to death that we weren't going to win anything when it comes to a competition at the end of boot camp because the thing that was funny was we had two twins in our group from Philadelphia, and those guys they laughed at everything. They could not stop laughing, and that's what got the drill instructor so upset because he would go over and yell and scream at those guys to tell them to straighten up. And the more he yelled and screamed, the more they laughed. They couldn't take his yelling and screaming. It just and then everybody else started laughing. We'd all get out of step. And then he'd say, "You guys you're just going to fail at everything." He'd give us the fail speech, like we weren't going to make it. And then we surprised him to death. We won the marching contest at boot camp. I had a test at the Reserve Center, and they, what they told I had a real high score in mechanical. So I was probably going to get into something mechanical. And at the Reserve Center, I went up and told the officer in charge that if there was a way that they could do it, I'd like to go shoot the big guns. So they said, and I think that was in the summertime of some kind. And then they come and told me at the end of summer that they could get me an A school at Great Lakes to go to gunner's mate school. So I ended up going there. No, I'm proud that I got to go. And later on that year, they got me a Class A school in Great Lakes. Then I went to gunner's mate school for 19 weeks. Being a gunner's mate and going to gunner's mate school, which was 19 weeks of electronics, electricity, hydraulics, and pneumatics, plus learning how the gun mount operated and everything, helped me get my job after I got out of the Navy. I got a job working for Xerox Corporation as a service rep, and I worked there for 33 years. And then when I got out of gunner's mate school, I went to Newport, Rhode Island to board the ship that I was assigned to, which was the Hugh Purvis. And then I stayed on the Hugh Purvis for about a year. I was assigned to Mount 53, the gun mount on the fantail of the ship, and my general quarters station was gun captain on the left gun, and then my watch station where I did my watches was in after steering, and we usually spent 4 hours back and after steering by ourselves, which was a little rough to take sometimes because it was so lonely. Well, when before we left port, we were in Newport. Uh, it's before we got a full crew. We only had I was the only gunner's mate on Mount 53, and I was just a seaman at the time, but I had gone to gunner's mate school, and we had one gunner's mate for Mount 52, and I think there was two guys in Mount 51. So we were trying to do maintenance on the guns that was due for them, and one was greasing all the equipment. And well, the officer in charge, who was really a great guy, we all liked him. He was going to have a contest to see who did the best job, and the one who got the best job got a 72-hour pass. So I started doing my greasing, and I sort of learned my greasing from my uncle out on the farm because I used to help him grease combines, and that when it was combining season. And so I thought it wouldn't be no big deal greasing something. I know how to do that. So I'm greasing all the equipment and everything, got all done. And when the officer came by to check my grease job, he failed me. And I'm going like, why did I fail? They said because he pushed the little ball in the grease fitting and no grease come out, which means it wasn't pressurized. And I'm going, well, that might be my fault because my uncle always taught me that when you grease in the combine, because you're out there in all that dust and everything, you always had a rag and you wiped all the excess off. So I didn't have any excess on any of my grease fittings, or I didn't let any excess build up on the outside because you always grease something to squirt the grease out. So I wiped all that excess off so it wouldn't collect dust. That's what I was thinking. Well, anyway, that was the wrong thing to do, and I failed. It was fun having the contest. Had this one experience where over in Vietnam, we were sent to North Vietnam to uh, attack this island that had these 8-inch guns on it. And while we were setting up to start the attack and everything, they seen us coming, so they started firing at us. And because we were close to the mainland was shooting at us, and so was this island. So we were sort of in a crossfire, but we kept up. And there was 3 destroyers and 1 cruiser, and the cruiser had 8-inch guns, but all us destroyers had 5-inch guns. And what they did was they sent us destroyers in first, and we drawed out the guns that were on the island, and they told us they were in caves and were like on rollers, and they roll them out to the end of the cave to shoot them. And when the destroyers started in, they started shooting at us, and we could see the flashes and the smoke from their guns, and then we would start shooting at them. And while we were keeping them busy, the cruiser would come in with the 8-inch guns and really give them a good going over. And we had probably made at least 2 runs in and was on our way out again. And my gun, which was on the fantail, would always shoot. It was me turning around, heading away from the island. And I noticed that the gun barrels weren't pointing, which means that the guns weren't going up and down like they should with the waves of the water and the movement of the ship. And I thought, well, something happened that motor's not working on the gun mount to make it do that. So I remembered from going to gunner's mate school where the solenoid was that turned the oil on to that motor. And I reached up, I told the powder man to take over my job because I didn't have that much to do as being a gun captain. I just watched mainly what was going on. So I got up underneath the trunnion and run my arm around up there where that solenoid was at, and I felt it, and it wasn't actuated. So I pushed it and turned it on, and the gun barrels started operating like they were supposed to. And while I was in that position, I could look out this sight that they had up there for what they called when they do shooting competition for the E. They had an officer that would look out this sight to watch to see how we were doing, and I could look out that sight while we were shooting, and I could see the enemy shooting at us, and I could see us hitting where we were shooting back at them. and it was really something to see that I would never get to see if I wouldn't have been able to take a chance of looking at that site. And then uh, I think we made one more run after that, and we were heading out, and they called a ceasefire just as both of our guns loaded, and we had fired probably over 400 rounds out of our gun mount. So our guns were super hot. We burnt all the paint off the barrels and they were smoking pretty good. And we're sitting there with two loaded hot guns. And at the time, our regular gun mount captain, he got hurt for some reason. And our chief took over as gun mount captain. And he reported to the gunnery officer that which was he looked through the telephone talker that we had two loaded hot guns. And they said, okay, aye. They acknowledged that they knew it. So we're sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and we got these two loaded hot guns, and we're like, how there's so many minutes you can go and you get a cook off, which means if the powder goes off, luckily it'll shoot the projectile out and you'll be okay. But if you don't, if the projectile goes off, it can blow up the whole gun mount. So the chief reported again. This is Mount 53. We got two loaded hot guns, and the telephone talker said, "Aye, aye." So we're sitting there again, and the chief keeps looking at his watch. And at towards the end here, he's getting big sweats and sweet beds on his head. He's worried so much about it, and I knew by my watch that we was way past the time for a cook-off. And finally, the chief got on the telephone again, and he goes, "Listen, you SOB, we got two loaded hot guns. What are you going to do about it?" And about, 15 seconds after that, boom, they shot both guns off, and we got them unloaded without a problem. And then after that, they called a ceasefire, and we were all out swabbing the bores and cleaning the burnt paint off the barrels and everything. And the gunnery officer comes flying down the deck, and he's red faced as can be. And he comes up to the chief and he says, "Chief, when you call that telephone talker an SOB, that's the same as calling me an SOB." And the chief says, "Sir, when you leave us sit that long with two loaded hot guns, you're an SOB." And that was a pretty uh, good experience to listen to, I'll tell you. The chief was mad. A lot of guys had trouble with the food, but I I never really complained about the food. I always thought it was good and you had enough to fill you up, and there were some things that weren't exactly the best, like powdered potatoes, the powdered mashed potatoes. There's no way they could ever get that powdered taste out of the potatoes, but that was the only thing that I probably didn't like that much. But I'd eat them because you something to eat. And the guys that did the cooking, like two of them are here today with our group, and they all did a great job as far as I'm concerned. The baker, Ron, he baked bread and rolls and stuff all night long, and we had those, and they were fresh, and they were excellent. Always like that. And let's see, as far as being on the ship, there's nothing like the camaraderie of being aboard the ship with knowing everybody. They're all your buddies. Um, I didn't have conflict with anybody that was something that you couldn't handle, and but we seemed to all get along really good and do our job, and not any arguments or anything like that. It was really good to be on the ship. The biggest problem I had was the cigarette smoke. It's in the war zone. We had to keep all the hatches shut, so there wasn't very much circulation, and it was so bad that there was 26 guys in my berthing quarters, and three of us didn't smoke. All the rest of them smoked. And sometimes it was so bad we couldn't go to sleep. And me and my two other friends, we'd go up on deck and sleep up on deck so that we could get some fresh air. It was, and the only time in my life I ever had nightmares was aboard the ship where I I woke up in the middle of the night. I think it was three times where I thought the place was on fire, and I woke up all sweaty, everything you actually bothering you. Well, our captain on our ship, as far as I'm concerned, he was one really great person. I was just a seaman and I had duty on the bridge when I first went aboard the ship. And being the helmsman and a lookout and a messenger. And I was lookout one day and the captain came over to me and he says, Sailor, do you see the ship over out that in this? He pointed out in this direction. And I said, I got my binoculars up and I'm looking and I didn't see a ship out there. And he goes, runs back to the radar and he looks at the radar and he comes back and he says, look right out there and see if you can see a ship. And I said, sir, I don't see one out there. And he takes the binoculars and he looks out there and he says, oh, okay. And he gives me the binoculars back and he says, he has his arm on my back and he says, now look right out there and see if you see a little post sticking up. And I looked out there and I finally seen a post when he described what I should be looking for. And you could see the post was sticking on an angle like this. So it was around the curve of the earth and it was sticking out like this. So it was probably like 14, 15 miles away with the post sticking up like this. I seen it. I said, yes, sir, I see that. And he says, you see how it's on an angle like that? And I said, yeah. He says, that's showing you the curve of the earth because that ship's on a different angle than we are. And I said, yes, sir, I see that. And he said, all right, now you know what to look for, right? And I said, yes, sir. He made me feel like $1,000,000. But I don't know how the ships are nowadays in the Navy because I think there's still some that were the size that I was on. It was a destroyer, a DD, that was 376 feet long and 41 feet wide, I think. And if anybody likes to go to the amusement parks, they would love being on a destroyer during rough weather because it's a ride that you can't believe. It's fun when it's dangerous, but it's fun. And then while we were in Vietnam, President Nixon decided to cut back on service members and military things, I guess. And they told us that as soon as the ship got back to home port, we were out of the Navy. The reservists were all out. And that's how I went. And while I was in the Reserve Center for 2 years when I got back to Dayton. So I stayed there for 2 years. It's a great way to start your life. Um, being in the service has helped me tremendously because I'll give you my example. During the recession we had several years back, I lost everything, and I got started again because I was in the service. I ended up getting me a different job, and I started coming back, and I could buy a house without having a down payment. And I got me a new house, and kept. I got another. Well, I had got another job, of course, and things just kept getting better for me, and all the benefits that I earned for being in the service helped me make it again. My dad was in the Navy. My dad was in World War II on an aircraft carrier, and he was a machinist mate, and he was a plane captain for an F-6, F-5 Hellcat. So I wanted to be in the Navy like my dad. He was on the USS Monterey, which was a light carrier, and he was in the battle of the retaking of the Philippines and the Battle of Okinawa. And he did tell me some stories about planes landing on the carrier when they're really trying to get the planes back to get the pilots landed on the carrier before they run out of fuel and things like that. And some of the planes had come in and land and blow both tires out at the same time. And they knew they couldn't move those planes fast enough to get them out of the way. So they just pushed them over to the side so they could get the next couple guys in without any danger to them. And he told me about another time when the planes were landing, and so he was a plane captain. He always stood on the side of the ship by the island, and he wasn't paying attention too much about there was so much stuff going on all around. He wasn't looking at the planes coming in. Well, when the planes coming in missed everything and peeled off, right over the top of those guys, and one of the other guys yelled at him to duck, and the other guys hit the deck just in time, or they would have been hit with a wheel from that plane that didn't make the landing. And he told me this is a little on the rough side that he was changing the oil in his Hellcat, and he forgot to put the drain plug in, and all 12 gallons of oil flowed out onto the hangar deck, and it took him 12 hours to clean it up.